I think that's very difficult to determine. I think it's going to be pretty close. There was no indication that anybody was moving about the house or doing anything different, so it's very hard to determine.
This has been a mystery that's confounded investigators and really the entire world for a week now, since Gene Hackman, his wife, and one of their dogs were all found dead at their Santa Fe home, and the simplest potential explanation of carbon monoxide poisoning seems to be less and less likely.
Some stories aren't meant to be told, at least not while the spotlight still shines. For decades, Gene Hackman was an enigma, not just to Hollywood, but to the three people who should have known him best: his children. The world saw a legend, a man who dominated the silver screen. But behind the curtains, a father who wasn't there. 3 children, 3 different lives. One shared question: was their father ever truly theirs? Christopher, Elizabeth, and Leslie Ann Hackman grew up in the shadows of a man they rarely saw. When their father's name started appearing in newspapers, they didn't celebrate. To them, success wasn't a gift, it was the force that took him away. Their childhood was filled with silence. Not the comforting kind, but the kind that seeped into every birthday party, every school event, every moment he should have been there but wasn't. And then, one day, that silence became permanent. No more waiting, no more hoping, just an empty space where a father should have been. Divorce changes things. For some, it's a chance to rebuild. For the Hackman family, it was the final nail in the coffin. When Gene and his first wife, Faye Maltz, split in 1986, it didn't just end a marriage, it erased a father from his children's lives. Christopher was 26, already used to an empty chair at the dinner table. As a kid, he invented stories to explain his father's absence. Maybe he was a secret agent, maybe a treasure hunter. Anything was better than the truth his father had simply chosen something else over them. And when reality finally set in, the disappointment ran deeper than any Hollywood script. Elizabeth? She coped differently. For years, she didn't let herself care. She had her mother, and that was enough until it wasn't. As she got older, the questions started piling up. Why did her father's birthday calls feel like scripted lines from a movie? Why did she have to learn how to love a man who never taught her what that meant? And then there was Leslie, the youngest, the one who barely had memories to hold on to. What she knew of her father came from TV screens and whispers at family gatherings. She wrote letters she never sent. She watched his movies not with pride, but with quiet resentment. To the world, he was a star. To her, a stranger. If distance had built a wall, Hackman's second marriage cemented it. When he wed Betsy Arakawa, a woman 30 years younger, it was clear he was moving forward, with no intention of looking back. For his children, that was the moment it became official. They weren't just absent from his life, they were erased. No more awkward phone calls, no more forced meetings. They weren't waiting for an apology they had already accepted one would never come. Christopher tried once, a final attempt. A diner in Santa Monica, his father sitting across from him, stirring a coffee cup like he was trying to find the right words. But the words never came. Instead, a single quiet confession. I lost track of my son very early. Christopher didn't respond. What was there to say? He wasn't angry, just tired. Tired of holding on to a relationship that had never really existed. And so, he walked away. Elizabeth and Leslie never even got that close. Letters turned into holiday cards. Holiday cards turned into nothing. At some point, they stopped waiting, stopped hoping, stopped caring. Whispered reunions. When the past knocks years past. Decades. Then out of nowhere, a phone call. It wasn't from Gene. It was from Betsy. The woman who had once unknowingly widened the gap now stood at the edge of it, urging them to cross. Gene was old, slower, different. If they ever wanted to talk, to say anything at all, it had to be now. And so, they did. One by one, they returned. Not for closure, not for answers, but simply to see if there was anything left to salvage. Christopher met him first. The man who once towered over him now looked smaller, more fragile. There were no dramatic apologies, no sweeping reunions. Just 2 men sitting in silence, trying to figure out what to say after years of saying nothing. Then Elizabeth, then Leslie. For the first time in decades, they sat in the same room, not as a family, but as people connected by something too complicated to explain. And while it wasn't perfect, it was something. A beginning, even if it came too late. The phone rang twice. Christopher saw the number New Mexico. He didn't answer. Then the message came. Gene Hackman was gone. No tears, no anger, just a quiet, sinking feeling. Elizabeth called next. Did you see the message? He had, but what was there to say? Leslie called after, voice shaky, but no one cried. They had been preparing for this moment all their lives, so why did it still feel like a stranger had just died? Leslie was the first to arrive at the house in New Mexico, expecting cold emptiness, but instead she found something she never thought she would: photos of them, framed, on shelves, hanging on walls. Not the kind for the press, but real ones. Christopher playing baseball, Elizabeth in a kindergarten graduation dress, Leslie gripping her father's finger as a toddler, and on his desk, letters, one for each of them. Short, hesitant, a man's last attempt at making peace with the past. Leslie hesitated before opening hers, unsure if she even wanted to know what was inside. Was it an apology, an excuse, a final justification for the years of silence? The ink was slightly smudged, as if he had stopped and started 100 times before finishing it. She took a deep breath and read. The media swarmed before they could even process it. Headlines screamed across every major outlet. Hollywood legend Gene Hackman passes away. What about his children? For decades, they had been footnotes in his story, the ones left behind. But now, the world wanted answers. Reporters dug through archives, called, emailed, desperate for a story. But this time, the Hackman children didn't run. They told the truth. Christopher spoke first. He wasn't a perfect father. He was barely a father at all. But he was ours. And that's the only truth that matters. Elizabeth, who had spent years avoiding the topic, finally admitted, behind every legend, there's a shadow. We were that shadow. And now we're stepping into the light. And then Leslie, the one who had never spoken, stepped forward. The cameras flashed, microphones extended, but she didn't flinch. Sometimes silence is crueler than words. Today we choose not to be silent anymore. And with that, they walked off stage. No Q&A, no further comment. They had said everything that needed to be said. Gene Hackman left behind more than just films and awards. He left behind 3 children who had spent their lives searching for a father they never truly had. Standing at his funeral, Christopher, Elizabeth, and Leslie realized something: his greatest legacy wasn't in his career, but in them. The weight of his absence had shaped them, but it no longer defined them. For years, they lived in the silence he left behind. But as they stood together, watching the crowd disperse, it didn't feel unbearable anymore. They didn't get the father they wanted, but they made peace with the father they had. And that, in the end, was enough. As they walked away from his grave, they left behind the years of waiting for something that was never coming. If you made it this far, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be heard. And today, we made sure this one was.